folks, and welcome to another episode of the Snowies Camping Show. You are here with Ben and Lauren. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe wherever you are listening to your podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube as well. So in reference to that, if you are watching us, you've probably noticed that we look a little bit different on this episode. And so we've had a couple of episodes published so far for season 2, but we did have those pre-recorded in the bank from a couple of months ago because
last year, yeah.
You've been away on a big lap.
I have.
Or half lap, I should say.
Yeah, I just took a cheeky quick 4 months off to go hit the road with my family and sign out of society. So
I think we kept that one in the bag pretty well.
We did, yeah.
So,
I didn't want people to know my house was sitting empty for that time, so we kept it quiet, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So this is our first actual recording of 2022 in our brand new studio, and we will pick Ben's brains a little bit more about his trip down the track. But today we have got Kevin in having a chat with us about water tank care for caravans and campers and things like that. How are you, Kevin?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm well.
Awesome. So you're joining us from our Snowies warehouse today.
That's correct, yes. I'm over here at Torrensville. That's where the main warehouse is.
Awesome.
And I'm in a room upstairs, so hopefully it's all going to work out okay.
I think we tried to dampen the sound of the forklifts and things in the background, so hopefully they can't hear
you might
that.
hear the occasional beep, beep coming through. But
Yes. Or a crash if they drop something, one of the two.
Need some more air curtains on the walls maybe.
Right. So before we get into it, this obviously with our Caravanning for Kev episodes is majorly going to cover water tanks, as I just mentioned, for caravan and campers. But if you carry water with you, jump back on to episode 14 if you haven't seen it already, where Ben and I just cover water storage for general camping and adventures and things like that.
Yeah, that was like jerry cans and those soft bladders and the smaller kind of options, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Kev, what exactly constitutes a water tank?
Well, water tank, it's a tank that's generally suspended usually underneath the camper van or a camper trailer. Some of the motorhomes or vehicles might actually have them built inside, but they're usually a plastic tank, and they come in various sizes. Some have 1 or 2, some have up to 3 even.
So I'm assuming that they would primarily come already built in?
Yes. So most of them do. I mean, some people may add tanks later. When I built my van, I put 1 tank on it. I found that I needed a second one, so you can't add a second tank. It just depends where you're going to put it. You've got to sort of consider the weight of them. As we talked about, balancing your caravan, you add a couple of 90-litre tanks at the back of the van, you're going to have 180 kilos at the back of your van, which is going to upset the balance. So you do have to consider it, but generally that's considered when the van is built, in the design, where they put the tanks. And if you're going to add one, it's just a good idea perhaps to get some advice if you're going to add another tank, particularly a big tank, and it's only a small van.
Where would you get that advice from, or where would you go
I would probably go back to the manufacturer of the van if you can, or one of the service centres to say, look, we're wanting to put another tank on. If they mount it fairly central, that shouldn't affect it much at all, but it can actually affect your ATM because you're actually adding weight to the van, so just be aware of that. But most cases, anyway, that service your van should be able to give you advice on that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I guess they've got to consider the weight because the tank's either full or empty or halfway in between. So I guess wherever it's mounted, it needs to be considered that it's stable no matter what the status is.
If you put a 90-litre tank on your van, that's adding 90 kilos, approximately, plus the weight of the tank, plus the stone guard. So you can be adding 95 kilos. And if your van's only just sort of balanced nicely at the moment and you work out the only place you can put it is right at the back, then, that can really make a difference to how the van tows. It'll be all right when they're empty, but because you don't realise that till you fill it up and you start towing.
What sizes do water tanks usually come in? Is there sort of an average size range for campers and caravans?
Yeah, and usually on caravans you'll get at least 1 tank that's probably 60 litres. There might be some that are 90 litres. Some vans that may have showers will have 2 tanks underneath, 2 90-litre tanks. I have seen 3 underneath the really big vans.
Okay.
So it gives you, about 180 litres. That's 270 litres, I should say. So that's a lot of water for a shower, but they're usually quite large vans, big tandem axle things. They can carry it. They're designed to carry it. And that comes into the design of the van. But usually camper trailers will have smaller ones. As I said, might have 60 litre. They might have something smaller. or they may have nothing at all. Just depends on what you're wanting when you order the camper.
Is there any advantage to having more than one tank in terms of, if you need, say, 150 litres or something? Is there an advantage to having a 70 and an 80 litre tank or splitting your water total over two, or is it better to just have one, or doesn't really matter?
It really depends on the volume of water you require. As I said, with my van, we had a 60-litre tank, and we found that if we went on extended trips, we had to carry water in the back of the car in jerry cans, which meant at some stage I had to then pour it into the tank. Now, you've got a 20-litre container, it's 20-odd kilos. I've got to pick that up and lift it up and pour it into the spout, and I just found it very difficult. So I sort of did some calculations and worked out I could fit a second tank on the back of the van. It didn't affect the balance too much. It's still within its ratings. But that's the advantage of having the tanks is you don't have to carry extra water in your car and add it later or fill up more frequently. So if you're going to remote areas and you want to carry lots of fresh water, the extra tanks are much more advantageous to having jerry cans in your car.
Is it a consideration with caravans? And I know I go from a four-wheel drive perspective where I carry water in lots of different containers because there's a bung in the bottom, it bounces around, one might leak. If that leaks out, I've still got more in another container, so I'm not in dire straits. Are they tough enough in a caravan, like the water container's tough enough to really not worry about that, or is that still a consideration?
The tanks under the vans are plastic. They're a fairly durable sort of plastic, but you get a big rock that bounces up and smashes into the thing. You can certainly fracture them and put a hole in them. That's why they need stone guards around them, around the front, the sides, and the bottom. But there's also the danger of the fitting where you attach your hose. That might get hit and can break off. So it's a risk. Yes, it is a risk. I actually was reading an article only recently of people who went up the Unidata track in their van and they broke a fitting, and both tanks had two tanks on the van, and they lost all of their water.
Oh, wow.
So they got to their destination and they had no water except a couple of water bottles in the back of the car. So that leaves them a bit of a predicament. So there is advantages to it. It is something you have to be aware of. But if everything's tucked up nicely out of the way and everything's guarded properly, it's pretty much unlikely to happen. But I suppose in some circumstances, yes, it can.
Okay.
So you talked about the tanks being made from plastic. Is there a particular kind of plastic water tanks generally come in, or even colours?
Generally, they're black and they should be a food-grade plastic, which means they don't give off any toxin. They're made of a material that doesn't give you a toxic plastic taste. You might get I suppose if they're brand new, you might get a bit of a little bit of a taste of it. I'm not really quite sure. I've never noticed that. But if you want to sort of put some water in and flush it out first just to make absolutely sure. But generally the tanks are quite safe to use, yeah.
And so in terms of the tanks being food-grade plastic, I assume then all accessories relating to that would also or should also be food-grade?
Yes, if you're using a hose to fill your tank up, it should also be food-grade, because if you don't use a garden hose, I mean, as a kid, you run around the backyard, it'd be hot, you turn the garden tap on, you have a drink out of the hose, and you used to get this little bit of plastic taste in it. Of course, you're using that to fill your tanks. That's where that flavour is going to go into the water. So every time you drink it, you're going to drink a plasticky taste, which is not very pleasant. So if you use a food-grade hose, that should not have that taste in it, and it should be the best way to fill your tanks.
They're usually blue, aren't they? Well, the ones that I've seen we sell here, they're colour-coded.
Yeah, I think the ones we sell blue.
You can have blue, you can have white.
Okay.
I haven't really seen any other colours, but they're the common colours, yeah.
Okay.
So just based on that, I mean, we've obviously had quite a lot of feedback of people saying that water out of their tank doesn't taste super great. So based on what you're saying, is that it might even be plausible that it's not necessarily the tank that is making the water taste gross. It might actually have come from their garden hose, if that's the hose that they're using to fill up their tank without realising.
Yes, that could be the problem. It also depends on where you're filling the tank. Now, I've travelled a lot, as a lot of people have, and you get taste from different towns. They all have different water sources. Some are dams, some are underground, some are actually from rivers, some are tank water, and they treat it in different ways. So you'll get different tasting water. From here, you go up to Sydney, the water will taste differently. You go up to Alice Springs, it'll taste different again. So you have a drink of water out of your tank. It depends what water you put in it initially as to what taste you get out of it. But in most cases, it should still be quite safe to drink, so long as it's town water. And if you're using the right hose, the right sort of filling apparatus, then it should be fine.
Okay, I've experienced that not for the Caravan, but with we talked previously about the soft bladders and the taste that they have. Mm. And I've always had a bit of a taste in them that I've detected when I've filled it up with water here in Adelaide, which is where we are. But I only had that taste when I filled it with Adelaide water. And I didn't have that taste anywhere else for my entire trip.
Yeah, right.
And it's just Adelaide water. So
that's super interesting.
I can drink Adelaide water normally, but when I put it in the bladder, it then has this taste. So I think there's a lot to say with the type of water you put in, and I don't know how the science behind how it reacts with the materials that the tank or the bladder's made of, but that seems to have a big difference in how the water tastes. And even some caravan parks in certain towns actually along the way just brought out that taste a little more than just really fresh water that hadn't been treated. For the most part was probably the best. Yeah.
Awesome.
I got a quick. I know we haven't got this noted here, but I've got questions coming up.
I've talked so much.
I've literally
so
walked in this morning and just been handed these notes. So it's why Lauren's doing most of the talking.
You're doing good.
But on filling up a tank, because you say 180 litre tank, right? That's a fair bit of water. Now I was carrying like 40 litres of water just camping. That's okay to fill up at a caravan park with just top up 10, 20 litres of water. But there was a few notes around, especially with remote locations, where they say they treat their own water. Or it's a limited resource, and please don't fill up your 200 litre caravan water tank from our water source. What are your thoughts on that, and where to best fill up your tank with being I guess it's being considerate to the water that's available, I suppose, where you're filling it up?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question, actually. Australia, as everyone knows, is a very dry place, and a lot of the water that comes from bores or whatever have to be treated. If you look at, I don't know if you've ever been to Cooper Pedy, their water is actually very salty, and they actually have their own desalination plant.
It tastes awesome, by the way.
Does it?
The water tastes really good once it's treated in Cooper Pedy.
Oh, yeah, it's very good. But from what I remember, they have time limits in the showers, and they ask you not to fill your tanks because it's actually so expensive. If you want to sort of buy water from them, yes, you can. But from my memory, it was some time ago when I did this, but they said, if you want to fill your tanks up, we're going to charge you X amount of litres to fill your tanks up. Otherwise, just use it as per normal. But in those sort of circumstances, I suppose you really have to do a bit of research, plan ahead. That's one of the reasons why I put extra tanks on my van, because we found that there were times that, yes, we were getting a bit low. And as I said, I had to carry water jerry cans in the back. These days also there's a lot of bladders and cardboard boxes you can buy from supermarkets, which is fairly inexpensive if you want to just keep that as drinking water, which is a much easier way to carry water. But if you can't put it in your van, you should have to put it in your containers in your car. And as I said, just try and think ahead as to where you're going and what the water quality might be and what the availability would be too.
Yeah. It's just I think you hit it on the nail on the head. Just think ahead. Don't assume that if there's water there that you can take 200 litres of it. Just take what you need maybe to get to the next spot. I think
that's probably also a good point you make here, because I know we're sort of digressing a little bit off our main topic, but keeping your drinking water and your all other use water separate, especially when water's scarce, is probably a good idea.
Definitely.
Yes, especially when you've got bore water in Central Australia. If you accidentally put that in your tank, it's going to be pretty awful stuff to drink. It won't actually hurt you per se, but it won't taste very nice. So that means at some stage you've got to empty it and flush it out and then put fresh water in it, which you may not be able to do until you get home.
So when you do have a caravan or camper or a brand new water tank in your vehicle or under your vehicle or whatever, is there anything that you need to be considerate of before you do your first fill?
Not really. The tank should be tested for leaks. It should be all ready to go, I suppose. Generally, if your van is pre-serviced pre-delivery, before you get it, they should put water in your tank and check it's okay. If you're a little bit worried about taste, then you might have to drain it. Now, that means you've probably got to get under the van and pull off one of the hoses and let it drain. Now, that might be a bit difficult for some people to do, but in most cases, you shouldn't really have to do anything. The van should be ready to go. It should be tested, and it may not be full, but there should be water in it, and you can try it.
So there wouldn't be.
If you have a taste, and you think it tastes bad, then contact the supplier and say, hey, look, this tastes terrible. What are we going to do?
Okay. So it's not like there's any consideration for the tank sort of maybe coming to you empty and having bits of, plastic shavings and dust and all sorts of stuff from the manufacturer in it. It's pretty quality controlled.
No, it's a moulded tank. They're blow moulded. So they put in a mould, blow moulded. Even the threads from the fittings are all blow moulded in it. So you shouldn't have any machining marks or anything like that in there at all.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting.
Are there any metal ones? I vaguely remember a friend of mine with a camper trailer that had all sorts of troubles with having a metal one that was leaking. Is that just maybe an older school thing?
I think some people... I have seen the odd stainless steel tank put on vans. These were very expensive to make, though, because they were custom made, 4 times the cost of a normal tank. I suppose if they do leak, it's not just a simple matter. You've got to take it off and weld it back up again, which can take a bit to do. I haven't had a lot of experience with metal tanks, but I have seen the odd stainless steel one. But if it leaks, you've just got to get it repaired.
How do you repair a plastic tank then? If a rock does hit it, can you just get a cigarette lighter out and melt the plastic back together?
Well, if it's a little hole, you can put a screw in it. That tends to work quite well.
Oh, yeah.
If you've fractured it with a big hole, we have done emergency repairs where we've actually used a silicone over a patch and glued the patch on in order for the person to get home. I don't know how they went with the silicone taste. I don't know if that got into it at all, but we sort of cut an aluminium patch and put silicone around the outside and then riveted on and covered everything with silicone. So you can do a patch,
right? But
it's not a permanent repair. If the tank has got a nasty fracture in it, it'll have to be replaced at some stage, yeah.
Okay. Next question. Sorry, you look at me like I'm done.
No, I'm not done at all. I'm just really acutely aware that I'm literally dominating this conversation with all my questions.
I'm getting back in.
And then it just occurred to me that you might not have any idea what's going on.
I've been back in the office for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's true.
I put my headphones on, and I've got a list of things here. But no, I'm trying to make it look like I'm not just sitting here letting you do everything. But algae in the tank. This is a good one because I've actually considered getting a tank for my 4-wheel drive instead of tucking a slimline tank or something in somewhere that's kind of out of the way. But then I always think, what if it does get kind of manky? There's one sort of fill hole like this that I've got to try and clean it out. And I don't think there's any magic solution that just removes the algae. Sometimes you got to get in with a brush, like your water bottle, right? You need a bottle brush to clean it up. So I'm assuming a water tank is the same thing. So how do you maintain that and stop algae from growing in there and the slime and stuff that out of mind, out of sight a little bit if it's a black tank that you can't see in?
Mm.
Yes, well, I think a lot of people can take things for granted a little bit. I mean, the tank's under the van, you can't see it, you put water in, you pump water out, everything's hunky-dory until suddenly you realise, well, something's not right here. It's either emptying much quicker than what it should do, which means it's got a leak somewhere, or you're starting to get this funny taste that's not good, or you get a little brown bits floating around in the water.
Ew.
Get a cup of water and look at it, oh my God.
I know exactly what
it can be really disgusting. The problem comes from a couple of sources. First of all, you may have put it in from the water source you're taking it from, particularly if you're taking it from a tank that's already someone else's, or someone said, yes, you can use that water, and you're putting in a container and pouring it in.
Yep.
The big issue that we used to see was that the filler hose from the filler down to your tank used to be clear plastic. And even though the tank was a food grade, they never used a food grade filler hose. So I thought, don't worry too much about that. And I've seen them go brown with algae, really disgusting. And of course, when your tank dries out, if you have it empty, this algae comes off the wall of the plastic and you fill it up and just wash it straight back into your tank again. And next thing you get all these lumps in your drinking water, which is pretty gross. So later model vans, they do have a black plastic hose, proper hose on it, so that should inhibit it. So, I mean, the reason why we're using black plastic is because algae needs moisture, it needs oxygen, and it needs sunlight. Yeah. And if you take one of those things away, the algae should not grow. Now, I'm saying should not. I suppose there are some types of algae that might still grow in the dark, but you take away that sunlight and it shouldn't grow at all. And, of course, when you have clear plastic filler hose, you get reflective sunlight under your van and it's enough to make it grow. Whereas you eliminate that by having the black plastic. So technically you shouldn't have algae growing in your tank. Right. But it does get down to also the source of water that you're putting into it too.
So it's about maintenance then?
It's about maintenance, yeah. I mean, some people like to leave water in the tank. Some people drain their tanks. that's a personal thing. I prefer to keep water in my tank all the time, only because I've seen if you do get algae, it tends to get more oxygen, I suppose, and it can sort of peel off the wall. But I've never had problems with water in my tank. I've always had clean water. I've always kept it full. And I know some people might just like to keep it empty. It's a matter of choice how you think things should work. But that's where the algae comes from mostly.
So is there a benefit to keeping it full? Because I think a lot of people, especially online, and there is a lot of chat around about, what is the best thing to do? Is it to empty it between trips or to keep it full? And you're just like, well, it seems personal choice, but why would a person choose one over the other?
That's a good question. I work on the principle that if it's full, the algae is less likely to grow and peel off the filler hose. I suppose I'm referring back to when you had clear plastic, because we used to take these things off and you can look inside and it was just brown, it's all flaky, and it'll come off. And the first problem was it was clear plastic. I prefer to keep it full mostly because it also shows up if I get any leaks in the meantime. It also saves me filling it up again before I go. It's just a personal choice. I don't think there's a real argument for one or the other. If you wish to empty it, but then you've got to fill it again. And I'm always worried about filling it up with something that might not be so that clean. I can't really say one way or the other is the best way. It just gets down to what you think might be best. There's lots of information on the internet, arguments for and against, so just have to make your own choice on that.
So I guess people love hearing what other people just do and works, and they tend to follow that. Obviously, you keep yours full. So there's products, Caravan, which is a water filter treatment company. They've got a product. It's a liquid that has silver ions or something in it that's designed for long-term storage. Do you use something like that in your tank? If you're I would think if you've left it sit for 6 months.
Yeah, like how long is too long to leave water sit without adding something to it?
Yeah. So do you use a treatment if you're leaving it for a long time just to keep it fresh and safe?
Well, I don't. As I said, I keep my tanks full. The thing is, to drain my tank, I've got to get underneath and pull a hose off. I don't have any tap or whatever.
So you keep it full because it's too hard to drain it.
Yeah, but like
that's one of the problems.
In terms of keeping it full, though, is like, can you keep it full indeterminately without having to add stuff to
treatment,
it?
Yeah.
Like, as in, because I think there are, what I personally thought, can you actually leave water in a tank for a year and then come back to it and drink it and have it not be spoiled?
I think you can. I've had water in my tanks for up to 6 months and never had to drain it. And I've always made sure I've actually tasted it before we've gone off on the next trip and made sure there is no bad taste in it. And I've pumped it through. There's no algae in it. So I'm quite happy to do that. If you're wanting to put a chemical in, then that's up to you. I prefer not to put a chemical in.
Yeah.
I have drunk water from water tanks all around Australia and not added chemicals. I've just obviously made sure it looks clear and I've never been sick. I've never had a problem. Now, that's my choice.
Yeah.
And you could do the same with your water tanks in your van.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary to add a chemical. I think just decent hoses, food-grade hoses. If you want to filter the water before it goes in, put a filter in line with your hose. You can buy a lot of portable filters as well and make sure the water going in is clean. But as I said, one of the problems, as Ben just pointed out, I've got to get on my tummy and crawl underneath and pull a hose off, and I usually get drenched doing so. And I try and drain it onto the garden, but then I've got to put another 120 litres of water back into my 2 tanks. So unless there's an issue, I'm quite happy to leave my tanks full.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That makes sense to me. I mean, if you're going longer than 6 months between trips, you probably got bigger problems.
If you wish to pull it out, if you wish to drain it, certainly do it. There's no way to say what's wrong or right, but I just find I've never had to put it that way.
Okay. I guess if people are worried, they can also always filter it on the way out to just the drinking element of it, use a filter or something. But if you do put a chemical in, like the microper that I was talking about, you're putting like a chlorine or something in it, and it does affect the taste of the water.
It does taste a bit bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about cleaning out your tank as well, how often should you clean your tank?
If you're getting a taste in it, and if you're getting some sort of algae buildup or something, yes, you should clean the tank out. The problem with cleaning it out is getting a thorough flush.
Okay.
You remember the outlets on these tanks are only 12 millimetre diameter. So it's not something you can blast water in and it'll come blasting out. You've got to fill it up and drain it, fill it up and drain it. Now, the situation at my home, my daughter's just bought a little 70s model Caravan, beautiful little thing, but the tank's got little brown lumps coming out of the water, so that's got to be cleaned out. Now, we're going to attempt to clean it first, but that means I'm going to have to take it off. The reason I'm taking it off is so we can actually upend it, give it a good thorough flush out, and upend it again, drain it, do it a couple of times and try and get rid of any algae that's in there. It's not always easy to do that. As I say, a lot of people can't do that. They're age, they might have disabilities or something. They can't crawl under their van and undo the tank. This is going to be a bit of a job on this one even. But that's the way I would do it. But the only way you can really clean it out is just to flush it out. That's the best way to do it. We'll probably use a bio product. There's a couple of tank cleaners on the market, and there's also sanitizing things that you can use. And you can use things like Milton, use vinegar, you can do all those sort of things. Someone said they use a mild solution of bleach. But the thing is, with all of those sanitizers, you've got to then get the flavour out. Yeah. And once again, it's difficult when it's under the van. So taking the tank off and getting out on the grass and just spending a bit of time, that's probably the best way to do it.
With a really long bottle brush.
Oh, yeah.
That's my...
So you've got to get around the baffle. The baffle's in the middle of the tank to stop the water from sloshing around too much. So you've got to sort of get around that too. So that can be quite difficult.
It's a really long bendy bottle brush.
Like
Sorry,
our what do you call it? Like chook drinker at home. It's like a 30-litre thing. I know we're talking chickens, like a chook drinker, right? So I'm totally going skew here, but it's clear plastic, so it does get algae build up every now and then. And obviously it's like got a standard jerry can mouth in. So I can usually put a little, like a handful of gravel in it, and between me and my partner, we can shake it around. So it's got that little aggregate in it, which helps to sort of clean out the inside. But I guess then you can tip the gravel out and it's, it's aggregated the inside. It's given it a bit of a scrub. There's no gravel in there, but you can't do anything like that with a van water tank, can you? It's not like you can put an aggregate inside of it and then...
I thought you were actually going to say maybe you could do that with your water tank. Just go down to the center middle place and get a bit of aggregate.
No, but that's what I'm genuinely asking. Like, I can see your face, Kevin. I'm glad you're getting a bit of a chuckle out of this. But like, genuinely, is there something like that you could put in your tank and try and agitate the sides?
I haven't heard of any aggregate that you can put inside. The only thing I've seen is a substance called tank clean or tank cleaners. It's a sterilising compound. Once again, you've got to leave soaking overnight and then just a thorough rinse out. I've never heard of using an aggregate. High pressure hose, maybe you can get it all the way in there, but that's about the only way I think you can get your tanks cleaned out.
Super long high pressure hose with a bendy nozzle.
Very long, I guess.
And a big
especially
bottle
on a 90-litre tank or a 110-litre tank.
Yeah, totally.
Must be
it's a
something
big tank
that
empty.
we're going to invent something. There's got to be something, a big bottle brush you can stick in there that, I don't know. Anyway, so I'll stop on the bottle brush thing.
Yeah. So how would you, we've run through a couple of options for how the treatments you can put in to get rid of algae and things like that. And you talked about some people using vinegar or bleach or whatever. What would you use to get the taste out?
Oh, just thorough rinsing.
Just continual
it's a bit
rinsing.
Like, if you've had baby bottles or you're sterilising equipment with, Milton, you sort of really got to rinse it a few times to get that taste out of the bottles.
Okay.
Rinsing will eventually get rid of it, but you just got to be thorough and keep rinsing until it's gone and have a taste every now and make sure there's no taste in there. That's the best way.
I'm sure I'm pretty sold on the fact that it comes down to what we discussed before. That's the water you put in there and how that's been treated that then somewhat reacts with the material that creates the taste. I think
it seems to me that the main thing is to just choose the path of avoiding algae
probably
as much as humanly possible through the choices that you're making with your water.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Put clean water in to start with.
I've been asked a few times, how does the algae get there in the first place? And it's quite interesting because algae is basically a fungus and it gives off spores. So spores float through the air, can land in water. So the spores must be in the water in the first place to start to grow in your water filter or in your tank. Now, where that's come from, I don't know, but they can exist for quite a while without being activated. And of course, this is where you get the activation from the moisture and from the oxygen from the sunlight. That's when it starts to grow. So they're pretty much always there. But yes, filtering is a good way of doing it. But otherwise, just preventative medicine, I suppose. Try and take all the steps you can to prevent it from growing.
Yeah. So the inline filters that you talked about before will filter out any algae particles from your filling water source.
And depending on the filter that you use, you can get filters that are very, very micro, small holes in them that will filter out all particles.
Okay.
That's how desalination works. They have filters that are very, very fine filters. They take out the particles of dissolved salt. So you can do that depending on what you want to buy, how much you want to spend. Some people just use the little carbon filters, the one in the little cylinders. They use those. That takes out most of it out. But how far do you go? You've got to sort of work these things out, and how susceptible are you to anything? Because the algae actually does give off toxins in small amounts, so many parts per billion, it probably won't hurt you at all. It's just more that you don't want to see this brown stuff floating around in the water.
Yeah.
I think those inline filters are probably the cheapest way to maintain it. You're probably never going to avoid it.
My only question on that is, are they equally as functional if you're not using mains pressure? Like if you say if you're filling from a header tank or you're out rural and there's no mains pressure with your water source, will you still be able to fill via filter?
Well, they're designed to filter in a pressure hose, I suppose. I suppose if you can't do that, as Ben suggested earlier, you can put a filter on your van that filters water before it gets to your tank.
Yeah.
Which case then it's being pumped through either by a hand pump or by an electric pump.
Yeah.
I don't know how much pressure they require to push the water through them. A hand pump might struggle a little bit, but vans that have electric pumps on them, they're usually working at fairly much higher PSI, so they should be able to pull the water through it okay. But it just, as I said before, it just gets down to initial planning. Make sure the water's clean, you've got the right tanks, you've got the right hoses, and you should be fine.
Is there any consideration to, apart from sort of your cleaning components and things like that, with protecting your tank or just general water tank care to get the longest life out of it and things that you can do?
You're talking about protecting it from damage? Or?
Making sure. I mean, obviously cleaning is one really important part, but is there any other considerations to ensuring that it doesn't split or get damaged or any of that sort of stuff?
Well, being under your van, of course, it's very susceptible to being hit by something. They're usually tucked up fairly high, but you've still got that risk of rocks flying up, particularly off-road vans. They should come standard with a very effective tank guard, which covers their forward-facing edge, both sides and the bottom. So the only thing that's exposed will be at the rear, and that's generally where the hoses go in and out. Even if you've got a van that never goes off the road, you've just got an ordinary on-road van, it's probably still a good idea to have a tank guard on it, because at some stage you're going to go on a dirt road, even with roadworks or roads that you aren't prepared for to be dirt, but they are, and you really want to go there. So a tank guard is the best thing you can do to protect your tank. Always also just making sure your hoses are well and truly tucked up nice and high. They're fixed to the underside of the van, so they're not going to go flapping around and have wear holes put in them, and that your joins are nice and tight. So that is down to a visual inspection every now and then. Just means of looking underneath your van, making sure nothing's dripping, getting someone to work the pump, make sure nothing runs out anywhere. And if you're the sort of person that can't get down on your hands and knees and look under your van, when you move your van off the site, just make sure there's no wet patches on the ground. That's a sure sign that you've got a leak. But also don't be tricked by the breather holes. When I fill my tanks up, water pours out of my breather holes. That's how I know, apart from coming back out the spout, that's how I know they're full. Now, that might dribble out for a little while before it actually stops. So your breather will drip a little bit of water out. Just let that finish and then leave it sit there for a while and then have a look and make sure there's no other leaks. But that's about the only thing you can do.
Righto. Okay. We've got questions here about pumps too. So there's a lot of, usually a tank on a caravan is then attached to various 12-volt pumps that will help it come out for showers or kitchen or wherever you've got water coming out in your caravan. So what about maintenance on those? Are they, I think I'm going ahead to answer that question before you've had a chance. I'll let you speak.
I was just going to say there's very little maintenance you can do on a pump. Depending on the pump you use, there's some pumps are impeller pumps. They're little tiny pumps that you fit down by the outside of your tank, and they they are not self-priming, so they've got to be down low enough for water to flow into them.
Right.
They're very simple little pump. You usually put them on a simple outlet or even attached to your hand pump inside. They'll pump water through those quite okay. Then you've got your diaphragm pumps. Now, these are very efficient. They'll pump up to fairly high PSI. Apart from them leaking or constantly turning themselves on when they're not needed to, that's a symbol that they're leaking inside. They're allowing the pressure to drop and the pressure switch starting up. But really, as far as maintenance go, just visual, once again, making sure there's nothing leaking out of them and everything's working fine. Same with your hand pump. If you've got water coming out of the top of your spout as you lift your hand pump up and down, then you know the seals are buggered inside and it's time to replace the pump. But once again, it's a visual thing. There's not much else you can do really as far as maintenance for those.
Okay. And in terms of sort of hot water tanks, because I'm assuming that should be included in your general water tank maintenance on your van, what considerations are for those?
Hot water tanks are a tank, once again, and they also need consideration. Now, hot water tanks are generally pressure tanks, which means they build up a pressure. The first thing to consider is that all pressure tanks have a pressure release valve fitted to them that prevents them from splitting and exploding. And I have heard of them having very catastrophic explosions, mostly household tanks, but in caravans, there's no reason why that couldn't happen as well. So your pressure release valve releases water under pressure. It usually dribbles out, and there's usually a little tap on the top or a little lever which you can lift to activate the pressure release valve. Just do that every now and then. Make sure there's nothing gumming the thing up, because if it sticks, you're going to build up pressure and it's either going to blow a hose off, or in really, really bad cases, it can rupture the tank. Now, that's pretty extreme, but as I said, in a household situation, I have heard of that, and it do a lot of damage and can be very dangerous with that hot water just bursting out of the tank. The other thing to consider is a sacrificial anode. Now, I've got one here. That's a sacrificial anode.
Kev's come prepared.
Oh, yeah, yes. Props, as I said earlier. Props. Now, this is a magnesium anode. You can get them in aluminium as well. This is screwed into your tank. Now, not all tanks have these. Tanks with stainless steel tanks don't need these. But a lot of water tanks are steel, and they may have a lining on the inside to protect it from rust. But over a period of time, of course, that lining might slowly break down. It might crack with expansion and corrosion. And what this does, this actually attracts the corrosive compounds that are in the water to this first before it reaches the tank. Now, I took mine out of my tank in the Caravan. I've got a hot water service in mine, and this is what I took out.
Wow.
You can see the difference. Now, half of it's gone, and the rest of it's slowly being eaten away.
That's crazy.
Now, I've seen them completely gone. This is a stainless steel shaft here, so that won't rust. But that's what it can do. Now, how often you change this will depend. I try to look at mine at least every 6 months. And as I said, I took mine out and I thought, my God, look at that. So I put a new one of these in. And what you get is this sort of white, crumbly sort of stuff, chalk-like stuff. That's all in the bottom of my tank. So I then had to flush it out. And I got heaps of that stuff out of it.
So for those who can't see what
nice stuff.
Those who can't see what Kev's holding up here, we're just going
to $30 anode compared to $1,000 tank. These things are fairly cheap insurance.
So I just want to explain to the non-YouTube viewers, because we're looking at this cool thing Kev's holding up, is you held up a new, what did you call it? A sacrificial anode. Anode, yeah. So that's just it's a cylinder of metal, right, that screws in the top. So what's that about? It's about 30 centimeters long and 3 centimeters in diameter or something. And then
it's about 15 1.5 centimeters in diameter.
Okay.
And it screws into the body of the tank.
Yep.
And it sits there and slowly corrodes away. Okay. Hopefully saving your water tank.
Because the second one you held up had probably only half of that material left, with just a thin sort of tube down the middle. Just holding it up again now, so you can see all that has corroded away. So I guess the theory is that it's better that it happens to your sacrificial anode than the inside of your tank. So
totally, we'll probably get a photo of that as well and chuck it in our show notes.
Yep. So I just assumed that caravans, this is coming from a non-caravan, I just assumed caravans had all those kind of instant hot water sort of things. I didn't know it actually had a storage vessel for hot water in a caravan.
Yes. Yeah, okay. There was a time some years ago where you could have what you would call a continuous flow hot water system, something like you'd have on your home. But gas regulations came in and changed all that. You couldn't actually have that mounted inside your van. You had to have it mounted outside. You had to have it in a enclosed space. It had to be ventilation for the heat and all sorts of things. So basically wiped that off the caravan used. You might see them on a lot of houseboats might have one on the outside of their van. of the body of the houseboat. The houseboat's fine, but a caravan is very impractical and just doesn't work too well.
Okay.
So they all went to storage heaters, which is, as I said, either a steel or a stainless steel tank, and that's when they've always had the storage tanks, but yeah, that's the way that they can go now.
So, Kevin, you also might not know this because we're starting a new thing with our interviews this season, but on our Facebook group, Snowy's Camping Show podcast, we give listeners the heads up on who we're going to be chatting to and see if they've got any questions that they want us to pose. So we've got a couple from Aaron Miller and Kelly Lombardo. There were a few more questions, but we've mostly covered those in the body of our podcast. It's new to you as well. So we've covered the other ones in the body of our podcast so far. But Aaron has asked, can you build a water filter system that will remove the bad taste from the water from inland Australia, e.g. around Charleville and Birdsville?
I think you can. You would have to go to someone who deals with water filtration, someone who's an expert in this, because you can get filters that will take out basically all taste and all odour and all foreign particles. You can actually get very, very pure water. If you sort of look at what they can do to sewage water, they can remove everything so that it's perfectly clean and you can actually safely drink it. Not that we do, but you can. So I can't think why there wouldn't be some sort of filter system you can build into your van that would take the water out, so you can put any sort of water you want to in your tank and then filter it towards it gets to your tap. But yes, you'd have to go and get some professional advice on that.
It'd be a bit of a multi-stage filter because hiking filters do some of that, and there's usually a filter down to a certain micron and then a carbon filter in there as well. And there's another application, I can't think of the name of it at the moment, that also removes other things because like the bacteria is sort of one size of particle size. Viruses are smaller. Metals have to be removed, I think, by attaching to something that then filters out. So
like charcoal.
I think so. Yeah. So I think you'd have to put multi-level filters,
multi-stage filter.
Multi-stage filter. Yeah. Yep.
He's also asked another question, which is what can be done to stop iron dropping out of precipitation in the tank when using bore water? And I think we've sort of hashed this one out a little bit and not 100% sure on the answer to this one. So
no, we'd have to look into that a little bit more. I have never been asked that sort of question and I wouldn't even know how to answer it, I'm afraid.
That's right.
Iron dropping out of precipitation, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't give you an answer on that one at this stage, I'm afraid.
So we'll put a pin in that one, Aaron, and we'll come back to you on the Facebook group.
Yeah. Good one. So there's one more. This was from, who is this one from? Kelly, how do you say the last name?
I would say Lombardo.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend having a grey water tank and what's the best way to clean them? Okay, actually, that's a good question because I've seen a lot of caravans on my trip just with the grey water, even in caravan parks, just going straight out onto the grass or whatever. And I'm in a tent next door with all this water kind of creeping across. So
walking through their dirty dishwater that's got like bits of pasta in it and stuff.
Or shower. Someone would run for all night. I had so much water just going on the ground. Yeah. Anyway, I won't get into that, but what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, look, it probably is a good idea, and depending who you are, what you said, Ben, is typical of the problem that people just let their water run straight onto the ground under the van, and it creates a big soggy mess with bits of food particles in it. Because then they leave, and of course then it attracts flies and things. So really, if you're going to be at a caravan park, there's usually drains fairly close by that you can direct your water straight into the drain through a hose.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got a long hose. This can actually slow things down a little bit. So, you might think, it'll just flow away. That's nicely. But then you've got 5 meters of hose all coiled up. The water's got to make its way through it. So it goes down the sink very, very slowly. So people didn't do away with it. The other option, of course, is to have a bucket underneath the drain so that the water all goes into the bucket. But then, of course, it'll overflow and you've got to empty it. So a grain water tank isn't a bad idea, but at some stage you've got to empty it. And you've still got to be able to put a hose on it and take it to somewhere where it drains away. Now, grey water tanks take up a lot of space once again. You've got to have somewhere to put it. If you want to do that, that's fine. I actually have a bucket with a hose attached to the bottom so that the bucket will fill and it'll just slowly drain away down into the drain next to me. So no water goes on the ground. The bucket never overflows and it goes straight into the drain. If you're bush camping, it's probably a good idea to run your hose off to a tree somewhere. Now, that water shouldn't really hurt the tree, particularly if you're using some sort of biodegradable dishwashing liquid. it's actually helping watering the tree. But yes, if you want to put one on, you can, but there's a lot of fuss and bother. I think there's easier ways to go about it. And if you want to clean them, it's the same sort of thing as your freshwater tank. Yeah, you can sort of put tank cleaners in it. Obviously, I wouldn't worry about taking it off and flushing it out, but just a good tank clean going in it, then flush it out into the garden somewhere, it should be okay.
I actually saw someone with a bucket under their caravan, but obviously they had no idea the volume they were using inside the caravan versus the volume in the bucket, because the bucket was just, it caught like 10 litres of water, but then sat there for the rest of the weekend overflowing. So.
Are you saying, Kev, that your bucket has a hose that comes off it and the bucket just acts as a a stopgap catchment type thing?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I actually saw there's someone on YouTube. I don't know who it was. It was a brilliant idea. He actually got one of the drains which you get in your sink and put that in the side down the base of the bucket, and then attach your normal drain hose to that and ran that hose off to a drain somewhere. So your sink in the caravan would go straight down into the bucket, so it would flow quite easily and empty. But then the bucket, of course, it would take, your sink would hold only, 5 or 6 litres, I suppose. But then it would just slowly drain out of the bucket and down into the drain on the caravan park. So I never had to worry about overflowing. I never had to worry about anything on the ground. And it diverted the water nicely into the correct drain. Or even as I bush camping, I push it right away out somewhere to a bush or something, so it drains off over there. It works quite well.
I guess you could catch some of the food scraps and stuff in that little drain on the side too if you wanted, and empty that.
If you wanted to filter it, yes. But I just let it all go through. So long as it's going away from everyone else's camp and it's going to a safe place, it should be okay, yeah.
That's a good idea.
That's some hot tips there.
We've been chatting for...
We're not far off an hour, actually. So we've been chatting for a long time. We love picking Kev's brains.
Yep. Good.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about it. We'll wrap that up now. It's been really awesome to have you with us again, Kev. We haven't seen you since last year, mate.
I've been around.
Been around. Awesome.
Well, we haven't been in.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you haven't seen him for ages.
I haven't seen anyone since last year. Yeah.
But anyway, thanks so much for joining us, Kev. Hope you have an awesome rest of the day.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thanks,
bye.
Kev. See ya.
So, Water Tank 101, I think we sort of basically covered most of it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll let you wrap up. Sorry, I'm out of tune.
So once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast, and also jump on that Facebook Snowy's Camping Show group. Give us any questions that you've got of this episode, anything you want to ask Kev that we didn't cover. But other than that, we will see you again next week.
Cool.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.